poisonings and vaccinations through chemtrails. As previously mentioned, so-called chemtrails are also a form of vaccinations. Since the number of vaccine refusers has been steadily increasing over the past decades, they have started vaccinating people additionally through the air. What exactly are chemtrails? These are chemical contrails sprayed from airplanes at high altitudes, which spread persistently and form a gray, overcast cloud cover that no longer allows sunlight through. The whole thing is also known as solar radiation management. Methods to influence solar radiation. The SAI method, SAI being equivalent to stratospheric aerosol injection, is the most significant, meaning the distribution of aerosols in the tropopause, the boundary layer between the stratosphere and the troposphere. This boundary area lies at an altitude of 8 kilometers at the geographic poles and about 18 kilometers at the equator. The whole thing is apparently intended to counteract the theory of global warming advocated by science due to climate change. This type of weather modification is also called geoengineering in English. The German Federal Environment Agency categorizes chemtrails as a conspiracy theory. The mass mind-numbing media, of course, are playing the same tune, with only very few exceptions. What else is to be expected? The term chemtrails was once coined by former U.S. presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich in a U.S. draft law for the protection of the atmosphere and space. Space Preservation Act H.R. 2100. 77. Kucinich, who had access to secret military files, demanded that exotic weapon systems of the military, especially in space, be prohibited, explicitly listing chemtrails among them. Among the other exotic weapon systems, there are also electronic and psychotronic weapons, low-frequency weapon systems, plasma sound, ultrasound and electromagnetic weapons, laser weapons, chemical, biological, environmental, climatic and tectonic weapons, strategic, tactical or extraterrestrial weapons. The expression exotic weapons systems includes weapons that damage space or natural ecosystems, such as the ionosphere and upper atmosphere, as well as weapon systems intended to harm or destroy populations or regions on Earth or in space. Can't believe it right now. It's best to read it yourself on the US Congress website. Many skeptics would still claim that the chemtrails are actually ordinary contrails. Here, I would like to pose the question of whether these skeptics have blinders on and have actually looked at the weather phenomena in the sky over the past months and years. The question is absolutely serious, because out there I see most people wandering around like zombies, staring at their smartphone in front of their big heads, and thinking they are the crown of creation and have eaten universal wisdom with big shovels. Then there are those people who walk around outside with their heads down, constantly staring at the ground and apparently never look up in their lives. I bet you've often seen such species wandering around outside. You often see a crossbreed of the two types, that is, people who hold their smartphone in front of their lowered head and sometimes almost get run over by cars when crossing streets. But well, to once clearly differentiate chemtrails from contrails, condensation trails, you will find a simple explanation below. Usual condensation trails, in English contrails, form during flight operations at altitudes over 6,000 meters. Essentially when water vapor and engine gases containing soot meet relatively cold air, at temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius, as well as a relative humidity of less than 100% or more. The higher the relative humidity, the longer lasting the contrails are. These long-lasting contrails widen over time and eventually become indistinguishable from the natural cirrus clouds that form at the same altitudes. Typical contrails last only a few seconds to a maximum of about 20 minutes. Depending on the combustion process, engine heat, and current weather conditions. A real contrail only forms approximately 1.5 aircraft lengths behind the airplane, as the hot water vapor needs time for condensation. Chemtrails, on the other hand, emerge immediately without a gap from the wings or tail surfaces. Commercial airplanes usually fly in the tropopause at an altitude of about 10,000 meters or slightly higher. In this area, the relative humidity is regularly well below 100%, which can also be inferred from the usually extremely low to absent cloud formation at these altitudes. Allows. Where clouds cannot form due to insufficient relative humidity, long-lasting contrails cannot persist either, unless they are artificially dispersed covering aerosols with a condensation behavior different from normal contrails. According to studies, the development of water vapor quantities in the stratosphere shows a decreasing trend, which further hinders the formation of long-lasting contrails. Measurements from the Meteorological Observatory in Lindenberg have shown a decrease in relative humidity of about 4% in the upper troposphere since the 1970s. The average relative humidity over the observed period is about 40%. How much water vapor the atmosphere can absorb in the area from the upper troposphere to the lower stratosphere is greatly determined by the prevailing air temperature. As the temperature decreases, the capacity of the air to absorb water vapor does not decrease linearly, while the threshold values for temperature and humidity merely define the conditions for contrail formation. An additional criterion must be met for the persistence of contrails, namely the supersaturation of the atmosphere concerning the ice phase. Otherwise, only short-lived contrails form, which quickly dissipate after mixing with the outside air. Modern airplanes and helicopters have generally been equipped with high-bypass turbofan engines since the 1960s, and practically do not produce persistent contrails. I think by now this should be clear. There is even a United States patent with the number US 20090032214, which describes the dispersal of aerosols, emissions at high altitudes to block the sun as part of climate change mitigation. Official statements about chemtrails. Interestingly, even on the German TV channel ZDF, in a report, the population was attuned to the existence of chemtrails, as it stated that researchers are working on a solution to curb global warming, which involves releasing toxic sulfur powder into the atmosphere worldwide through airplanes to reflect back the sun's rays. In a ZDF weather report, the weather presenter explained using the map of Germany that those snake-like lines were probably released by military aircraft, which have nothing to do with the weather. At a conference on climate change organized by the United Nations, not a UN session, Rosalind Peterson, president of the Agriculture Defense Coalition, Coalition for the Defense of Agriculture, in September 2007, a speech in which she points out weather modification through chemicals sprayed by mostly non-commercial airplanes, and that by blocking the sun, this type of weather modification adversely affects future crops, as well as generally influencing the growing seasons in agriculture. Because less sun means less photosynthesis for the plants. According to their statements, Such a chemically enriched persistent contrail can extend up to 4,000 kilometers and last for 20 hours. She also cites studies from NASA, the American Space Agency, which state that these human-made clouds trap heat in our atmosphere and thus at least partially contribute to global warming. While it is otherwise claimed that spraying is done to stop global warming. Both NASA and the US Air Force are involved in these spraying actions, releasing large canisters of chemicals into the atmosphere without any regulation. Among these dispersed chemicals are also aluminum, barium, and strontium, which, according to Peterson, destroy plants and trees because the roots are no longer able to absorb sufficient water or nutrients due to the poisoning. The chemicals also end up in our groundwater and drinking water. She also mentioned that aircraft emissions increasingly release nitric acid into the atmosphere, which in turn depletes the ozone layer, according to a report by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We already know from the vaccinations that aluminum destroys the brain and can trigger Alzheimer's. Further confirmation also comes directly from the US Air Force, where Kristen Megan worked for 9 years in bio and environmental technology as an industrial hygienist and environmental expert. Part of her job was to authorize and review chemicals, check who requested them, and for what purposes they were needed. Over time, she became skeptical due to large quantities of chemicals intended for use, as the containers did not indicate the manufacturer or were not assigned to a military department, which did not comply with standard protocol. When they started asking questions, people began to demonize her and threaten to commit her to an institution and take her daughter away. Since then, her life has changed, as well as her attitude towards the US military. Among the chemicals she happened to see in huge quantities were aluminum, barium, strontium, and sulfates, salts, or esters of sulfuric acid. She quickly made the connection to the chemtrails when she took air and soil samples from her environment, analyzed them, and found exactly the same chemical components in them. According to her conclusions, the chemtrails are sprayed for various reasons. If you destroy people's food and ecosystem, you have them truly under control. The agricultural industry profits from it, with pesticides, genetically modified plants, and even insider speculators, who can benefit if they already know in advance where and when it will rain, crop yields or failures, stock prices, etc. At a public hearing of the Regional Air Quality Management Agency in Shasta, California, in the year 2014, pilots of commercial passenger aircraft, former pilots of the US Air Force, doctors, and scientists spoke, all confirming the existence and characteristics of chemtrails. At this hearing, the following insider statements were made, among others. It was reported about airplanes that have no passengers on board and also no transponder code, thus traveling almost anonymously, that spray miles-long chemtrails. These spraying planes are loaded by personnel in chemical protective suits. Why, if everything that's being done is supposedly harmless? Due to the spread of micronized aluminum, a 25% increase in lung diseases, and almost a quadrupling of Parkinson's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases, as well as an increased number of Alzheimer's cases, can be observed. Nanoparticles cause cell death in the brain. High amounts of aluminum were found in children with attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity disorder, and autism. After a detoxification process, they return to normal state. In addition to aluminum, the spread of barium, strontium, and manganese is mentioned. It is clarified that aluminum can naturally occur as a compound, but not in free form, as it is found in the air and soil. This is not normal. If the sun has a white haze, then there is aluminum in the air. Chemtrails suppress the immune system. According to Swedish Green politician Pernilla Hackberg, in addition to metals and chemicals, chemtrails also contain viruses and virus fragments, as reported by the site naturalnews.com, citing an article from the Swedish newspaper Katrineholms-Kuriren. However, the letter deleted the article from their site. In addition, arsenic, bacilli, and mold, mercury, lead, nickel, mold spores, polymer fibers, mycotoxins, nanoaluminum-coated fiberglass are also sprayed, among other things. Submicron particles that contain living biological matter, as well as red and white blood cells from humans, as independent analyses are said to confirm, according to a US activist site and the citizens' initiative Sauberer Himmel.de, if virus particles or virus fragments are being spread both in vaccinations and through chemtrails, one almost comes to the conclusion that vaccinations and chemtrails are a two-component weapon against us useless eaters. This means that certain virus fragments administered through vaccinations are activated in the body by certain virus fragments from the chemtrails. It is quite possible that, for example, inactive and dormant substances, once administered through vaccinations, only unleash their devastating effects through suitable activators from chemtrails and/or food. Of course, the reverse is also possible, meaning that toxins from chemtrails are activated by toxins in the vaccines. Especially for this reason, one should avoid additional poisonings wherever it is still possible. However, according to scientist Anne Fillmore, the metal lithium is also being sprayed test-wise in some regions in the USA. In medicine, lithium is usually prescribed for bipolar disorders and severe depression. According to Fillmore, the list of possible side effects is not insignificant. Primarily lethargy. One feels heavy and as if under the influence of medication. Muscle and joint pain, slurred speech and blurred vision, confusion, hallucinations, sudden weight gain, stomach problems that can lead to diarrhea or constipation. Disruption of the hormonal system, endocrine system. Stomach swells as if pregnant. Hair loss, loss of appetite. Impotence. That NASA releases lithium under the pretext of rocket experiments is surely just a silly coincidence. If you look at who is involved in financially supporting scientists advocating for large-scale global climate influence and geoengineering, Bill Gates is at the forefront. Is it a coincidence that Bill loves both vaccinations and chemtrails? In this context, the United Nations must not go unmentioned, because the World Health Organization, WHO, has developed a vaccination project that aims to administer the measles vaccine via aerosols, that is, through the air. By the way, you can read about that on the World Health Organization's website. The Bill H-6011, submitted on March 24, 2017, by the U.S. state of Rhode Island, called Geoengineering Act of 2017, created a surprise, which aims to critically consider and legally regulate geoengineering. The draft law states, among other things, geoengineering is defined here as the intentional manipulation of the environment, which includes nuclear, biological, chemical, electromagnetic, and/or other physical agents that cause changes to the Earth's atmosphere and/or surface. B. The General Assembly of Rhode Island notes that geoengineering includes many technologies and methods with dangerous activities that can harm human health and safety, the environment, and the economy of the state of Rhode Island. C. It is therefore the intent of the General Assembly of Rhode Island to regulate all geoengineering activities as set forth in the provisions and regulations of this chapter. The list of techniques for intentional manipulation of the environment C includes, for example, solar radiation management, or what some refer to as chemtrails. Ground-based geoengineering and/or atmospheric deployments of the same, including the tools and vehicles to implement it, including drones. Protection through cloud cover and cloud brightening, space sunshades or sunshields, solar shields or atmospheric sunscreens, for example, reflective particles like sulfur dioxide and aluminum oxide, artificial ionosphere, for example, high-density plasma clouds, ocean fertilization with iron or lime, re-icing or cooling of the Arctic through artificial means, genetically modified carbon dioxide-consuming plastic trees, atmospheric use of high-frequency microwave radiation, aircraft geoengineering activities. The same bill even lists possible consequences of all these climate intervention methods. Global dimming reduces the absorption of vitamin D in humans and animals. Reduced photosynthesis. Local precipitation patterns change. Chemical components in the local rainfall, pollution of air, water and soil when the particles fall to the ground. Detriment to the health of humans, animals, plants and other living organisms. Acceleration of biodiversity and species losses. Less direct sunlight on Earth. Current estimates suggest 25 to 30%. Less sunlight reaches the Earth due to chemtrail spraying. Increase in acid rain, sulfur and aluminum oxide. Droughts and floods. Increases in ultraviolet radiation, UVA, UVB and/or UVC, reaching the Earth. Visibility impairment. On the last page of the bill, which states that the licensing process would have to be public, it concludes, this law would establish a system to regulate the intentional manipulation of the global environment through various means known as geoengineering. This law would also stipulate that a person engaging in geoengineering activities would need a license from the director of the Department of Environmental Management. Thanks to conjunction.info for the translation. So, with that, chemtrails and their negative effects on humans, animals and the environment have been conclusively and once and for all dismissed as mere conspiracy theory, much to the chagrin of the establishment and other propagandists. Whether the bill actually deals critically with the issue, or simply wants to legalize the chemtrails in the end, is initially of secondary importance at this point. What is important is that it is being increasingly addressed by official sources, and thus gives the world's population the chance to finally open their eyes. Chemtrails. Trails that do not dissipate but remain in the sky and spread out. Chemtrails over a field in the USA. On the left side, you can see how the trails have already spread and are starting to cover and darken the sky. Typical are cross and checkerboard patterns, so that the expanding streaks form a closed cloud cover. Please do not tell me that you have never observed such a phenomenon in your area. I see it almost daily where I am, and have for many years. Harald Kautzeller. Chemtrails and the transhumanism agenda. Regarding the distribution of aluminum and barium salts as well as strontium, I found another interesting article on saubererhimmel.de that goes into more detail on this topic. In all likelihood, barium, strontium, titanate, piezoelectric nanocrystals are sprayed, which transform the atmosphere into a technological plasma. With this artificial plasma layer, golf can be played. These crystals can leap between different lattice structures, spontaneously changing their electrical properties. A featherlight polymer mixture serves as a carrier substance and ensures the binding of the barium and aluminum powder in the air. Finally, the sprayed particles are supposed to form clouds. The German scientific researcher in the field of environmental analytics, Harald Kautzeller, delves a little deeper into the matter and explains. If you read the patents carefully, it becomes apparent that wave and their time-reversed replica waves are being used here. This means that scalar wave physics is being applied. If the crystals respond to these waves with physically conventional reactions, then the nanoparticles also capture and scatter biophotons. Intercellular communication and energy exchange within biotopes rely on the free exchange of biophotons. Biophotons are bidirectional light waves, composed of those waves and their time-reversed replica waves, through which cells are coupled over spatial distances, exchanging information and energy. The bidirectional biophotons are optically in mutual cancellation, almost like a standing light wave, which makes the tissue transparent to them, bringing crystals into the system that are sensitive to exactly these waveforms, which they absorb and refract as white, informationless, non-coherent, arbitrarily polarized, and thus no longer as couplable light. Thus, cell communication and the free energy exchange within plants are terminated as soon as the Welsbach particles penetrate the tissue. The same happens between plants and the microbes in the soil, for example. It is enough for the particles to stick to the surface of the plants or distribute in the space between. One must not only think of meadows and forests. The ocean could also be affected concerning the quality and quantity of plankton production. Just because the particles float in the water and disperse and destroy cell communication within the plankton biotopes. This means that with these sprayed metal compounds, artificial electric fields are generated, in combination also with mobile communication and other harmful waves. And thus the nanoparticles can manipulate the flow of biophotons in living organisms like humans, animals, and plants, and thereby disrupt or manipulate cell communication. Similar to the vaccinations, the light metabolism of DNA can also be disrupted here by the chemtrails. That the topic of chemtrails is not just about weather influence, I have now made clear. It involves the control over human consciousness and also the expansion of technical possibilities. In his lectures, Mr. Kautzeller offered very explosive information and delved deeper into the core than most other researchers ever have. His discoveries and connections will shock many people. You expand further on what has been said about DNA and bio or light photons. Below is a condensed summary of his most important statements. Without delving too much into complex scientific and technical details, the influence on weather or climate by chemtrails forms just the outermost layer that the public is allowed to know, which in my view, in the course of the propagated climate change, serves as a very good distraction. If one looks a level deeper, one must speak of advanced military technology being used. The technical plasma and reflective metals enable, among other things, extended radar range, missile defense shields, and three-dimensional radar airspace surveillance. This is because the particle plasmas have optical and electrophysical properties. All this causes, as we have already discussed, the dying of plants, trees and animals, and also a reduction in population to a certain degree. Behind this chemtrail project are United States intelligence agencies like the CIA, NSA and NASA in cooperation with the United States Air Force. If we go one level deeper, we discover a transhumanist agenda behind these global spraying actions. That is, the intention to merge humans with machine technology. And besides the metals and nanoparticles, biological agents also come into play, which have been and continue to be introduced into our bodies through the air. The elements that are sprayed form a fusion of biology, chemistry and technology. According to Vela, we are permeated with small antennas that create a bidirectional interface between radio signals and our inner light body, if one may call it that. Radio signals from the outside, such as microwaves, Wi-Fi, mobile networks, scalar waves, are transformed by the biological agents in our bodies into light signals readable by DNA. Our DNA communicates via light photons. The reverse also works. DNA light signals are converted into radio signals by the same agents. What does that mean now? On one hand, pulsed information from outside can be introduced into the body in the form of light, thereby blocking or triggering feelings. The entire emotional state of a person can thus be controlled from the outside. For example, this could trigger an Arab Spring in the Arab world or elsewhere in the world, where a group of people suddenly overthrows their own government. Morgellon syndrome, fungal disease. If we delve a little deeper into the subject, we learn from Vela that these biological agents are so-called morgellons. These are artificial life forms, specifically a combination of unicellular organisms, multicellular organisms, and fungi. These morgellons also grow like fungi. They form mycelia and fruiting bodies. Such a fruiting body matures in a 28-day cycle in the human gastrointestinal tract, and possibly in the uterus of the woman, grows to about 3 centimeters, and resembles a human embryo in the 20th week of pregnancy. It is hermaphroditic with developed sexual organs. In morphogenesis, the morgellons have insectoid and humanoid features, and according to some sources, are said to be present in chemtrails and genetically modified foods. They form fine capillaries that absorb nanoparticles of certain classes, which happen to be sprayed precisely through chemtrails. The result is then living optical fibers that fill themselves internally with various nanoparticles and function as small quantum readers, which can be electromagnetically activated and controlled from the outside, as previously mentioned. On one hand, information can be brought into the body from the outside, and on the other hand, information is also transmitted outwards through this interface. Due to our unique DNA signature, we can be individually located worldwide by intelligence agency radar systems up to 800 meters underground at any time. Additionally, emotional states and the health conditions of people can be read and recorded, and these can also be transmitted to other people. The latter then experience states of consciousness that are not their own. Almost all people would have these morgellons in their bodies due to the worldwide spraying actions. Those people whose bodies develop resistance against them try to expel them as growths through the skin. Spiderweb-like blue and/or red threads, which are very hard and robust, then grow out of the skin. Officially, Morgellon syndrome is not recognized as a disease, although around 300,000 people worldwide have already presented with these symptoms. I will spare you the images at this point, as these beings feed on negative emotions, especially fear and anger. And as we know from Professor Dr. Yoda, we do not want to manifest anything with fears that we don't want. These parasites love an acidic environment in the body. Negative emotional states make our bodies acidic. Spiritually, this means moving more towards love and forgiveness, paying attention to one's thoughts and feelings. On the purely physical level, antibiotics and antifungals are said to have harmful effects because they destroy the good gut bacteria, just like mercury and sugar. These in turn promote the yeast fungus in the intestine, Candida. Therefore, amalgam restorations, heavy metal detoxifications, as well as regular deacidification of the body, for example through alkaline baths, intake of minerals, and increased consumption of as many organic foods as possible that have an alkaline effect on the body, are very important. So more raw food in the form of fruits, salads, wild herbs. In parallel, the immune system should be built up with good dietary supplements, including vitamins, minerals, trace elements, omega-3 oils, proteins, probiotics, hormone building or regulating herbal remedies as needed amino acid complexes, and tonics from the TCM Ayurveda area. Due to the fact that today's food and groceries have hardly any nutrients because of depleted soils, herbicides, and pesticides, in my opinion, it would be careless not to supplement with additional preparations 2 to 3 grams of vitamin C per day, daily magnesium, occasionally B-complex, and vitamin D3 plus K2 as needed have become part of my basic repertoire. The D3 needs the GC protein to form GCMAF. One must give the body enough, especially in today's times, so it can stand up to all the toxins and daily stresses in life. Seek advice from an alternative medicine practitioner if you are unsure about suitable supplementation. At the end of the book, I have listed some additional sources for those interested, which I have personally been ordering from for years and am satisfied with. Further detoxification tips can be found at Zentrum-der-Gesundheit.de, Aluminium-A, Haas, Leiten-IA, Datun, TTML. For example, natural silicon is said to be one of the antidotes for aluminum. In summary, it can be said that our air has literally been militarized and is being used as a high-tech weapon against us, who have been turned into living antennas and transmission and reception facilities. You can find lectures by Harold Kosweller on aquarius-technologies.de. What can we do against chemtrails? Worldwide call to action. We must regain sovereignty over our sky and our breathing air. There is no way around it. There are ways to at least reduce and curb the poisoning and darkening of our sky. In this case, the motto is strongly that the more people join in, the more effective our endeavors. Because here, it truly comes down to the masses. For all the following methods, the honest intention from the heart, without ego and greed for profit, is important. Otherwise, they will not succeed. Nationwide and worldwide action for sphere harmonization. A technical possibility is the use of so-called chembusters or cloudbusters, cloud breakers. I wrote about this in my previous book under the heading The Miracle of Desert Greening about the following interesting project. Diplom engineer Majid Abdelaziz, founder and operator of the Desert Greening Project, has created in the Algerian desert in just a few years what most would not have thought possible. He makes it rain in the desert, but that is far from everything. He transformed a part of the desert into a green oasis in just 7 years, where plants, shrubs, and trees now grow. A real vegetation with its own microclimate, where even organic vegetables and fruits are cultivated. A true miracle. You can learn more about his secret on the project's website, with the help of some ancient knowledge, which today is confirmed by the latest insights in quantum orgony and vortex physics. It is possible to enliven the consistently blue sky in desert areas and stimulate diverse weather activity. There are no rockets used to force nature to its knees. The methods are more akin to treating a patient with severe tension, using some very carefully placed acupuncture needles. The result is also similar. The patient recovers, and conventional science skeptically raises its eyebrows. The atmosphere experiences revitalization. The science of greening deserts is based, among other things, on the ancient sciences of feng shui and geomancy, sciences that embody the concept of holism. The cloudbuster, as a representative of the metal element, is in this thought only one pillar of integral environmental healing. Earth, water, fire, and trees are the other elements worked with. In modern research, Wilhelm Reich, Victor Schauberger, Nikola Tesla, Walter Rüssel, George Lakowski, and other scientists have made groundbreaking discoveries. But there is also knowledge from ancient cultures that can be invaluable for sustainable management today. Desert greening uses proven methods of life energy activation for water, soil, and plants. The interaction of these methods results in a revitalization of nature, even in areas like deserts, where natural living conditions are largely no longer present. Incidentally, the cloudbusters used, also known as Wolkenbrecher in German, are also capable of specifically targeting chemtrails through sky acupuncture to dissolve. Professor, in 2014. On the internet, you can also find construction manuals for simple chembusters, but I seriously doubt the correctness and efficient, especially long-term, effectiveness of such devices. Crystals are used that are not checked to see if they are energetically pure and have not been programmed with negative aspects, potentially causing more harm than good. Most people are not even remotely aware of this. Maybe corporations can be established with Majid Abdelaziz from desert-screening.com for building professional and functional weather harmonizers. The good man has many years of extensive experience and has already successfully transformed some desert areas into green oases, where fruits and vegetables grow and thrive like in paradise. In collaboration with the craftsman genius Peter Kutschera, he developed such a sphere harmonizer on a smaller scale, which might be of interest to homeowners. More information about this can be found at blauer-planet.de, where the following positive effects of such sky harmonizers are listed, which are built according to the specifications of Abd el-Aziz, who in turn used the insights of Tesla, Reich, and Schauberger. Air, soil, water, and organic matter are harmonized. The frequency becomes more natural, almost as it was in the 1960s. This can also help dissolve old blockages in people. There is a healing of air, soil, water, and all living beings. Plant growth is promoted. Chemtrails are dissolved. HAARP can no longer negatively influence or manipulate us. People become more awake, aware, and courageous. Chakras are activated and harmonized. The large version has an effect radius of up to 500 kilometers. If it encounters the vibrations of another facility, the description states, they then work together and mutually reinforce each other. Synergy effect. Dear people in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and worldwide, brave and kind-hearted people, companies, and foundations are called upon to help establish such a network of harmonizers in our countries. There is no time to lose. Dissolving chemtrails through prayers. This is directed exclusively at those who are spiritually open and working, as well as all who are interested and know how powerful prayers can be. We are not alone in the universe. We have the divine creation on our side, which we can ask for help at any time. In the spiritual world, a vast host of angels is waiting to help us. They do not act because it would go against our free will. This means we must actively ask them for help. However, this must be done sincerely and from the heart. The following prayer can work wonders. Dear angels, please dissolve all chemtrails in the sky and neutralize all toxins that are sprayed down on us at all times, day and night, whenever you see fit. Thank you very much. This type of phrasing is important because, as individuals, we must not interfere with the learning processes of other people or the human collective. With the addition, provided you deem it appropriate, we do not incur any karma. The angels then decide if and how much will be dissolved. I myself have practiced this several times in my hometown, on days when chemtrail streaks were visible in the sky. A short time later, these actually disappeared and did not form the usual overcast cloud cover. It doesn't always work. That's precisely why it's so important for as many people as possible to be aware of this and to ask the spiritual world for help, and do so every time or as often as possible when chemtrails are visible in the sky or the sky is completely covered. The more people participate, the more weight our requests and thus our collective will have in the universe. This, in turn, diminishes the influence of the dark side. If you have not had any connection to prayer so far, you are still invited to join in if you wish. Whoever has time and interest can, of course, use both of the aforementioned options. Furthermore, at this point, the esteemed readership is asked whether anyone has heard of one or more real, know of vaccines or preparations that truly and long-term make one immune against all the toxins in vaccines and chemtrails, or neutralize them. Furthermore, special vitamin cocktails as infusions that, in their synergistic composition, rebuild the immune system. The ruling class has such possibilities. Otherwise, they couldn't suppress and decimate humanity with full energy around the clock. Special detox methods with minimal side effects, which are hardly known beyond those already familiar, would also be interesting. Anonymous submissions are also possible. In all cases, the basic rule is source protection. Partly useful and revolutionary information and sources related to this, which can help humanity, will be mentioned in a future edition of this book, or in an article if applicable. Thank you. Mini-SHA harmonizers by Abdelaziz and Kuchera, with a height of approximately 2 meters and an effective radius of about 180 kilometers. The dodecahedron can additionally be implemented, which further enhances the effect. Such a system should also be capable of harmonizing harmful mobile phone radiation. HAARP, weather weapon, and influence on human consciousness. When it comes to the topic of weather modification, HAARP should also be mentioned in this context. HAARP, H-A-A-R-P, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. German, Active High Frequency Research Program for the exploration of the aurora, is a military and civilian high-frequency research program for, according to the official statement, investigating the ionosphere using radio waves sent into the ionosphere from huge transmission facilities. The Subcommittee on Security and Disarmament of the EU Parliament concluded during a hearing on the 5th of February 1998 that HAARP, a project by the US Air Force and the Geophysical Institute of the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, operated, used as a climate-affecting weapon system, where areas of the ionosphere are heated by emitted radio waves. By the way, one of the oldest HAARP facilities is located in Alaska, USA. Surprisingly, the German TV station ZDF once again revealed at least something about it in a program. Far from any civilization, the American military operates a facility here to manipulate the ionosphere. A vast forest of antennas can emit radio waves into the ionosphere. HAARP has a transmission power of 3,600 kilowatts. That corresponds to the power of 1,000 television stations. With the radio waves, they try to change the ionosphere. The radio waves pump energy into this layer of electrically charged particles. The ionosphere heats up, expands in these areas, and generates storms, a way to create problems for the military adversary. Very interesting. Did the sensor just take a nap? Through HAARP, not only can the weather be controlled at will, but also, by generating low-frequency waves, ELF and VLF waves, human consciousness can be influenced. VLF stands for very low frequency, and ELF stands for extremely low frequency. VLF waves operate in the frequency range of 3 to 30 kHz, and ELF waves operate in the frequency spectrum mainly in the range of 3 to 30 Hz. In the range just above, from 30 to 300 Hz, we then speak of super low frequency, SLF waves. Why are the ELF waves particularly interesting? Because the human brain also operates in this frequency spectrum. There are 5 states of the brain. Delta state in the range of 0 to 4 Hz, deep sleep, coma. Theta state in the range of 4 to 8 Hz, dream, hypnosis, trance. Alpha state in the range of 8 to 13 Hz, relaxation, meditation. Beta state in the range of 13 to 38 Hz, wakefulness, concentration, high excitement. Gamma state in the range of 38 to 100 Hz, highest concentration with high information flow, also fear, stress. What this means in connection with ELF waves was impressively explained in an interesting article on Zeitenschrift.com. The precise knowledge of electromagnetic fields allows access to the complex neurocognitive processes associated with the human self, consciousness, and memory. When corresponding frequencies impact the brain, altered brainwave patterns are forced at a certain intensity, and the function of the brain is disrupted, which can lead to serious disturbances. This manipulation of mental function disrupts neurological and physical functions. The effects on health can be considerable, as the human brain and various other organs operate with electromagnetic waves in the extremely low frequency range. On July 16, 1981, the North American TV station NBC, National Broadcasting Corporation, announced that the northwest of the USA had been irradiated with extreme low-frequency waves, ELF waves, for years. And the news agency Associated Press released a report at the same time, stating that this was also intended. The Soviet Union had a device called LIDAR from around 1960, with which human behavior could be influenced using ELF waves. In the USSR, the device was used to make people lethargic and put them in a trance-like, indifferent state. Although it can be used to treat psychological problems, neuroses, and high blood pressure, it can also induce a state of aggression or depression. Large LIDAR equipment was reportedly used to irradiate individuals, but also cities and entire regions of the USSR and the USA, with ELF waves aiming to induce certain behavior. According to information from the US Defense Intelligence Agency, it is possible to make sounds and entire words appear in a person's brain, as well as remotely induce strokes, heart failure, and other illnesses. Even Boris Yeltsin confirmed this rather unpleasant fact. In the 1989 edition of Microwave News, the later first president of Russia, from 1991 to 1999, told a reporter, "The KGB possesses an ALF device that can stop the human heart." During an interview with Radio Liberty, a US shortwave station in former West Germany, Yeltsin became somewhat more specific and explained that KGB agents had confided to him that they possessed a device emitting such a strong 7 to 11 Hertz signal that a heart could be stopped. Yeltsin quoted the intelligence officer saying, "If no first aid is nearby, then everything is over." Here, it may be interesting that an unusually large number of those who witnessed the assassination of John F. Kennedy died of heart attacks. The United States government is naturally in possession of similar devices. According to investigative journalist Jim Keith, their codename is Project Black Beauty. 11 devices were also said to have been used when Panama's dictator, Manuel Noriega, hid in the Vatican embassy in Panama City after the United States troops' invasion in 1989. The devices were disguised as loudspeakers, constantly blaring excessively loud heavy metal rock music. Officially, the music was supposed to make Noriega depressed. In reality, however, the embassy was irradiated with ELF waves. The ability to project messages, images, and belief patterns into the brain is also known as the Voice of God technology. The investigative journalist Preston James reported that this technology was used in the First Gulf War in an operation against soldiers of the Iraqi Republican Guard. They were made to hear the voices of Allah in their heads, commanding them to lay down their weapons and surrender, after which hundreds of Iraqi soldiers were crushed by tanks. The previously mentioned subcommittee of the EU Parliament spoke quite openly in 1998 about the characteristics of HAARP and its negative effects. The report from this subcommittee on the European Parliament's website states, HAARP can be used for many purposes. By manipulating the electrical properties in the atmosphere, immense forces can be controlled. If this is used as a military weapon, the consequences for the enemy can be disastrous. Through HAARP, a clearly defined area can be charged with energy millions of times stronger than with any other conventional energy source. The energy can also be directed at a moving target, including enemy missiles. HAARP can cause changes in climatic conditions. The system can also affect the entire ecosystem, especially in the sensitive Antarctic. Another serious consequence of HAARP is the holes in the ionosphere created by the strong upward waves. The ionosphere protects us from incoming cosmic radiation. There is hope that the holes will close again, but experiences with changes to the ozone layer suggest the opposite. The protective ionosphere thus has large holes. So, here, once again from an official source, the confirmation of how dangerous these transmission facilities are for humans and the environment. However, a section in this report particularly caught my attention, where it said, HAARP is associated with 50 years of intensive space research for clearly military purposes, such as part of the Star Wars initiative. to control the upper atmosphere and communication. Such research work is to be regarded as seriously harmful to the environment. They can have unforeseeable effects on people's lives. Nobody knows for sure today what effects HAARP may have. Secrecy in military research must be countered. The right to public access and democratic oversight of military research projects and parliamentary oversight must be strengthened. Aha, what do our eyes read there? There is talk of a Star Wars. I will discuss this very special war in more detail in the 3rd volume. Therefore, you can already take note of this statement in the report of the Subcommittee on Security and Disarmament of the European Parliament. However, Alaska is not the only place where these massive transmitter antennas are set up at 2 locations. Similar frequency facilities positioned worldwide can also be found, among others, in Russia, Nizhny Novgorod, Sura, Norway, Tromsø, Sweden, Växjö, Australia, Exmouth, Harold E. Holt Naval Communication Station, Peru, Chicamarca Radio Observatory, Antarctica. Worldwide, many other countries are also said to have HAARP or HAARP-like facilities. In Germany, there are many of these ionosphere heaters. The transmission facility located in Rostock-Marlow is considered the largest HAARP facility worldwide, with its enormous transmission power of 500 megawatts. Additional locations include, among others, Hamburg, Berlin, Wilhelmsburg, Jülich, Garking near Wiedenbach, Bornim near Potsdam, Tremsdorf, Wachtberg, Tautenburg, Thuringian Forest, Bad Münstereifel-Effelsberg, Max Planck Institute for Radio Astronomy. As the saying goes, don't do things by halves. And Germany, of course, has to be at the forefront. Of course, it is great when politicians also occasionally spill the truth. So, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, founder of the Nationalist Liberal Democratic Party of Russia in regards to the Ukrainian trip, threatened the Americans on camera when he said, "What I would like to tell the Americans. A plane was en route from Malaysia to China. It disappeared. Flight MH370. There was a tsunami, 300,000 on the sea floor. We called this operation Time to Wash. Ships disappear. The ship was there, now it is no longer there. Entire cities can also disappear. Washington was there, now the city is no longer there. The White House was there, now it is no longer there. Everyone wakes up in the morning and sees the White House is no longer there. Nothing is there anymore. There are snowstorms that can cover all of America with snow. There are weather weapons that can ensure that no one wakes up in a city anymore because the air pressure is too high. Everyone dies without explosions, without smoke, without Molotov cocktails, without a single shot, without radioactivity. The Americans should think about that." Very interesting, his statements, right? Was Zhirinovsky referring to the use of HAARP or possibly even other secret weapons? By the way, Zhirinovsky was born under the name Vladimir Wolfowicz Eidelstein in Kazakhstan. His father was a Polish Jew and once a member of the right-wing radical nationalist HAARP party in Israel. His grandfather was a wealthy industrialist in Ukraine. That Zhirinovsky is today the leader of the Russian opposition under the guise of nationalism is certainly no coincidence. The case of a controlled opposition is very plausible here. The audacious CO2 lie and man-made climate change. I seriously considered whether I should write something about it. As for many people, this ridiculous propaganda lie is actually easy to recognize. Blah 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 blah. However, since many fall for it and let themselves be further enslaved in their lives by new taxes and legal restrictions due to this global lie and stirred up hysteria, I would at least like to offer a few clarifying words for the last mentioned group. What is human-made here first and foremost is the influence on weather and climate by chemtrails, HAARP, and possibly other secret weapons. It has been claimed that 97% of scientists agree on the CO2 greenhouse theory. But 97% of how many? And who selected these scientists? The United Nations IPCC, which presumes to be the World Climate Council. Do we really still want to trust them after what we know so far? In recent years, the newspaper Die Welt writes in an article, there have been around 800 scientific studies that refute the CO2 greenhouse theory. Unlike the climate falsifiers who base their thesis solely on computer calculations, the approximately 800 scientific studies were based on facts, with their own experiments and measurements. The climate falsifiers based their theses on the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius, 1859 to 1927, who once proposed the hypothesis that carbon dioxide would warm the climate without any evidence. Explanation by Professor Tom Moore in the background. He considered this a blessing for humanity. A survey from 2008 conducted by the two German scientists Dennis Brey and Hans von Storch concluded that a significant number of scientists are skeptical that current climate models can predict global temperatures and sea level changes beyond a decade. Natural-news.com. There are now more than 31,000 American scientists who, as part of a petition, oppose the current version of propagated climate change.
Way back in 1997, 198, when the Kyoto Protocol was first being proposed, Art Robinson was one of his hat been hijacked by the left, that people were being lied to, and that real scientists all across the country, all across the world, were being ignored. That the fact that most scientists didn't believe that climate change was either man-made or was going to be a problem was being ignored and hidden by a small group of politically oriented scientists. And he said, let's organize a petition. That we can ask scientists to sign that says that we do not believe global warming is a crisis. We urge the United States government to reject the global warming agreement that was written in Kyoto, Japan in December 1997 and any other similar proposals. The proposed limits on greenhouse gases would harm the environment, hinder the advance of science and technology, and damage the health and welfare of mankind. There is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will, in the foreseeable future, cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of Earth's climate. Moreover, there is substantial scientific evidence that increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide produce many beneficial effects upon the natural plant and animal environments of the Earth. Period. Signed by 31,000 scientists, over 9,000 of whom have PhDs. This is a battle we must win. And if the more you get into it, the more you are lied about, and you get kind of used to that, and you understand what these people are, and mainly all of us, we have to help our country because we're in terrible trouble. And the world depends upon us, because if our example disappears, we could move for 1,000 years into another dark age. So this is a battle we're all in, whether we like it or not. Thank you.
You certainly didn't hear about that in the media either. Many of these scientists felt encouraged to speak the truth after retired NASA atmospheric scientist John L. Casey revealed that solar cycles are largely responsible for warmer periods on Earth, not humans. The same findings were already made by the German scientist Dr. Dieter Broers, and he published his important insights in the documentaries Re-Evolution 2012 and Solar Revolution. Already in 1997, Nigel Calder, a multiple award-winning British science journalist, longtime editor of the magazine New Scientist and BBC author, wrote the book The Magic Sun, The Fickle Sun, together with Danish physicists, in which they demonstrate that the sun is responsible for our climate. The World further writes about this. The results of the researchers, which include scientific papers on the effects of the sun and cosmic radiation on our climate, are largely hushed up. Politicians cannot do anything with that. It would mean that the flood of laws forcing citizens to pay ever new fees and taxes to save the world would no longer be justified. Neither the ban on light bulbs nor the gigantic subsidies for so-called renewable energy would make sense. Instead of influencing climate change with taxes, they should deal with the consequences of natural climate change. Yes, that's how it is. When you then look at the main composition of our air, only then does it become clear how infinitely foolish we are actually being made to look. 78.084% nitrogen, 20.942% oxygen, 0.934% argon, noble gas, together 99.960%, 0.038% CO2 carbon dioxide. And nature is supposed to be responsible for 97% of this 0.038% CO2 in our breathing air. This means that humans account for 3% of the 0.038%, which would correspond to a total of 0.00114%. And they want to make us feel guilty for climate change. Yes, now CO2 screamers will loudly shout that every little bit more of our doing completely throws the climate into disarray. I know it's just as bad as with the Jehovah's Witnesses or another sect. To that I can only respond, the elite should finally release technologies suppressed for 100 years. Then we will also produce less CO2, expensive. By the way, the latter is urgently needed by plants for photosynthesis. And as we all correctly learned in school for once, we know that through photosynthesis, sunlight and CO2, plants produce oxygen. However, if rainforests are continuously being cleared worldwide, there are fewer plants that could consume the excessively surplus CO2 to produce oxygen. But it is easy to continue to shackle and harass people as air polluters. The CO2 hysteria subtly imposes the lie of overpopulation on us. Because the more people there are, the more CO2 emissions, right? Speaking of air polluters, the approximately 90,000 ships worldwide burn about 370 million tons of fuel. According to the German Nature Conservation Union, the 15 largest ships in the world emit more sulfur dioxide than all the cars in the world combined. Global warming is an expensive hoax. Donald Trump, 2014.